Welcome back to the Drama Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. You are in for a real treat today. I am chatting with Dr. Srini Pillay, who is Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of ReuLay, a digital therapeutics company that's developing strategies to delay the onset of cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and stroke by targeting on-demand anxiety and stress reduction based on the well-established link between stress, epigenetics, inflammation, abnormal metabolism, and disease. So we talk about a lot of the aspects of anxiety management and strategies for focus and unfocus. Dr. Pillay brings a lot to the table. So he graduated top overall medical student in South Africa and top award-winning resident in psychiatry at Harvard. He is a former assistant professor of psychiatry and director of brain imaging researcher at Harvard, a certified master executive coach, and CEO of Neurobusiness Group, voted one of the top 20 movers and shakers in leadership development in the world by training industry. And what else can I say? He's been a pioneer in the field of transformational neurocoaching, which provides business leaders with deep psychological understanding that's relevant to their personal and professional lives with practical tips, tools, and techniques to enhance leadership development using mindset strategies to decrease stress and anxiety while enhancing creativity and agility, facilitating change, and optimizing mindset in times of disruption and transformation. So we go into a lot of these different things that he shares in his projects. He's also the author of several books, which we will link to as well. But I think that you're really going to enjoy this episode. I feel like whenever we're talking about mindset, there's just so much to learn, and he has a lot to share about the fear that holds us back and how to really unlock our potential. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get right to it. Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Srini, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. It's lovely.
I was so excited for this conversation. I have so much respect for the work that you are doing, and I always love asking people a good origin story. And I'd love for you to share with us about how you found your way into psychiatry and neuroscience. It's such an incredible field.
It's always difficult to answer the how did I get there questions because I can never tell if I'm making it up or not. But I think at medical school, I pretty much liked everything. I liked psychiatry. I liked obstetrics and gynecology. I liked surgery. I liked internal medicine. And I think the brain was one place that I knew connected with the rest of the body in a way that was pretty primary. And so trying to understand the brain was always at the top of my agenda. And what I knew was that in many other disciplines within medicine, there were already algorithms. Like you come in, if you have chest pain, you go into a chest pain protocol. If you come in and you have a fractured femur, you go into a fractured femur protocol. But psychiatry was young enough that I could determine how I wanted to think about that in order to think about things differently. And to this day, I'm still evolving in my understanding of what it is. But I always tell people, and it takes them, they're a little taken aback by this, but I say, I kind of don't believe in mental health. And they're like, what do you mean you're a psychiatrist? And I say, well, I don't think the brain stops functioning at the level of the neck. I think what is mental strongly determines what is physical. If I had to remove your brain, it would impact your heart, it would impact your gut, it would impact your adrenal glands. So any emotions that you're experiencing are activations in your brain that eventually impact your heart, your gut, your adrenal gland, and also potentially how long you live. And so psychiatry is exciting for me because I'm interested in psychogenic longevity, which is what are the psychological factors that allow us to live into older age more healthily and to be able to think about these unseen factors that so many people don't think about. People think stress and anxiety and depression are just feeling states. And of course, as feeling states, they can be quite disturbing. But what's even more disturbing is that these feeling states can actually lead to changes in bodily state as well. So I think it's that integration that really drew me.
I love how you use the word excited. about, that what you find exciting about psychiatry. I think that it helps to be excited about the field in which one is working and studying and devoting so much energy. And you also found your way into transformational neurocoaching, which I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so when I was in psychiatry, I was competitive, I did well, I wanted, and then suddenly I thought, I'm not, do I really want to restrict myself to one thing? Because, I really love the sciences as much as the arts. I love all different parts of medicine. And I thought I'd like to be able to apply this in a context that's not just patients in a clinic. And so what I did was I became a certified master executive coach. And then I started training leaders globally on how to manage their own resilience, agility, and creativity, as well as their team's resilience and agility and creativity using brain science. And initially, people would be like, well, what is this is not a brain science, this is a business. And I would say, well, businesses have people and people have brains. So if you really want to impact the business, you want to impact the brain to impact the people to impact the business. And so as a result of that, I do a wide sort of range of work that goes from very practical cognitive strategies. Here are the 5 ways to decrease stress and anxiety. Here are 3 ways to build confidence so that people know that there are research based ways they can change their brains. One of the most exciting thing about the brain is neuroplasticity, which is that the brain can change. And no matter where you are in your life, just knowing that you can do something to change your brain is really empowering. But the transformational part has to do with the fact that from these basic methodologies, we get into slightly more esoteric things like who are you and what is your ideal self? And as a spiritual being, what are you connected to and how is that connected to your business? And initially, for some people, that's like, wow, that's too much of a stretch. I just go into work, clock in, and get my work done, not realizing that a lot of the energy we need to sustain ourselves from business comes from connecting to something much larger than ourselves. And so I guide people into that process, no matter what their religious denomination, no matter whether they believe in God or not. Really, what it is about understanding that the human brain and the body is actually not an isolated thing. Even as we're talking, my mirror neurons in my brain are activating and reflecting your facial expression and vice versa, which is kind of amazing that your facial expression lives in my brain and that my facial expression lives in your brain. And anyone listening to this is also going to be able to catch both of our emotions at the same time. And once we begin to understand that, and we begin to understand even bigger things like the fact there was a study done looking at people in 2 parts of the world, India and France, and they hooked their brains up to computers and the internet, and they tried to see if they were not looking at each other, might they be able to guess what the other person was thinking? And just having a thought, when they thought words like hola, for example, it was transmitted through their neurons, through the internet, to the other person in a different country. And even though they weren't looking at them and they couldn't hear them, that message could actually be transmitted. Speaking to the fact that interpersonal connections are extremely powerful. And the more we understand that, the more we'll understand, even as a business, how local businesses are impacting things globally. So the transformational part is a little more esoteric, and we usually get to that after going through some more concrete recommendations on how to build confidence or how to decrease anxiety and challenges like that.
I love that so much. I grew up, I've actually had this on the podcast, but my mom is a psychotherapist, but she started as a hypnotherapist. And growing up, I was introduced to all these different healing modalities and this idea that our thoughts are so powerful, our energy is so powerful, and that we should use that energy well and be really conscious of it. And I didn't, it wasn't until I was an adult that I really started to understand and see that in action. When I started my own business when I was in my late 20s and just saw I can't imagine how it would be to be a business owner without that understanding that our energy is so powerful. And not that someone has to be a business owner to do that, but it's been very interesting when working through the years in different settings, whether that's clinically, outpatient, corporate settings, like you name it. I've had a lot of different experiences, but seeing that there's those people that seem to have that understanding of, or that like kind of consciousness about their energy, and that those who just don't, that they're in a very different field of existence, so to speak. Not literally, but mentally. And so I love that you highlighted that.
Yeah, you're saying that sort of makes me think about when you said your mom was a hypnotherapist and how important mindset is and how important belief in oneself is. Now, when people say to me, belief, like I don't care, like I just need to do this practical thing, I will frequently point them to studies that show how powerful belief is. So, for example, there was a study where they gave people milkshakes, and the milkshakes were 300 calories, but they told one group it was 600 calories. And in the 600 calorie group who thought they were getting 600 calories, just believing they were getting this higher calorie milkshake increased ghrelin and increased their satiety. So they got full because thinking that they were getting a higher calorie milkshake made their hormones change. It's the same thing with cyclists, for example. They did this with a group of cyclists where they told them they were taking this caffeine boosted drink, but there was no caffeine in it at all. And the group that believed they got the energy boost did much better. And there are umpteen other studies that I could quote where the mind is so powerful that being aware of one's mindset is crucial in being able to get the motivation we need, not just psychologically, but biologically as well. And now there are so many studies showing the biological impacts of hypnotherapy as well. So I think your mom was definitely onto something, and we're increasing in our knowledge of the power of that kind of consciousness.
Keep for validating that. Like growing up, I remember having to always like kind of defend her. And still, like I was working in a space like in a medical setting where you would think that they would be very open to different types of modalities. And the people in charge were like really not on board with it. And hypnotherapy has been used as a clinical tool for decades.
Yeah.
And, we do have research on its benefits. It's not like a party trick, you know? So thank you for
No,
saying that. I appreciate that very much.
no, absolutely. I mean, when I was, I did my consultation liaison psychiatry piece at Mass General Hospital, and we would actually do hypnotherapy, and it would work for pain reduction. So hypnotherapy is really powerful.
And you have so many different things that you do. It's like I'm trying to gather my thoughts and figure out what I want to ask you about next. But see, this is, and I struggle with attention. Like I found out in my late 30s that I have ADHD. So I was like, that answers a lot of questions. But attention, like this is so hard for so many people, even those who don't have ADHD. And please, if I butcher the title of your book, I am just sometimes I stumble over words. Please correct me. But in your book, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, Unlock the Power of the Unfocused Mind, you share some really effective strategies for really harnessing attention and just nurturing that focus. And I'd love for you to share, what maybe a few favorites that you have found to be especially successful.
Sure. So I think it's absolutely true that most people's attention is sort of blasted right now with notifications flying across your desktop. You have 10,000 different things you have to attend to at the same time. You've got home, you've got work. So it's difficult for the human brain to be in a kind of chill state. One of the things that I often say to people is that what people don't realize is that focus and unfocus can work together very well. And so in Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, what I talk about is how to unfocus in order to focus more effectively. So, focus in general can be super helpful. It helps you complete tasks, you go through your checklists, really helpful. However, there are several disadvantages to focus. One of them is that focus actually takes energy away from the brain. And by the end of the day, you start to not care. It's not that you're an uncaring person. You're just like, one study showed that when you had one group particularly focusing on a video, and at the end of the day you gave them this problem about who to save in this puzzle, people were like, they couldn't care less. And then when you fed them glucose, they started to care again. So so focus does take away energy from the brain. In addition, focus is great, but if you don't pay attention to what's around you, if you don't look around you, you're not going to be able to take in information. So the problem with too much focus is that it makes you not aware of competition. It makes you not aware of what's going on around you. It also, if you go with your nose to the grindstone, you're not paying attention to upcoming challenges. For example, it took people a while to realize that AI was actually going to probably take away their jobs. They were not sure because they were just focused in the present, not anticipating the future. Focus also makes it very difficult to be creative because when you're creative, you're connecting two or more things. So when you're in this unfocused, what you think is a scattered state, you can also take advantage of that by actually using your unfocused time to make connections before you focus again. And then finally, focus is helpful because it can bring you into flow. And when you're in flow, you're in what we call the embodied self, meaning you're not even aware that you have a self that talks to the other self, or a judging self or an experiencing self. You're just in the flow state. However, we need times for our brains to put together information about who we are. This is called the narrative self. And that's where the unfocus can actually help. So, what unfocus does is it gives your brain energy so you can focus better. It allows your brain to put two and two together so that you can, when you do focus, you'll have a better idea. It allows you to be more connected with who you are. It allows you to see things around you so you can gather that information, and it allows you to predict. So if you think, well, that's great that my unfocus can improve my focus. How now can I actually create a more focused well, how do I create strategic unfocus is the first question. And there are a couple of different techniques that I talk about in my book. The first is firstly napping. 15 minutes of napping can give you 1 to 3 hours of clarity. So if you feel like you're like really sluggish in that afternoon, you're like, oh my God, maybe I should have another cup of coffee. Napping can actually be even more restorative for some people. Also, doodling on a piece of paper. Doodling has been shown to improve memory by 29%. So it really helps you gather the information that's already in your head. Then there's booster breaks can be super helpful, where you take 15 minutes just to go off running. And you come back and you actually feel more connected to other people. Some people will call that a runner's high, but you can also go on a brisk walk. And then there are other techniques like positive constructive daydreaming. So Jerome Singer in the 1950s found that sitting at your desk and daydreaming was not that helpful. Or like thinking about the prior night's indiscretions, like what did I say at the party, and did I have too much to drink, and is also not helpful. But what is helpful is positive constructive daydreaming. And the way in which you do this is you set aside time, 15 minutes, you do something low key, like knitting, or you can go for a walk or gardening. And then you let your mind go so that your attention is inward. We spend our whole day looking outward, but we very rarely say, hey, why don't I just take this flashlight and turn it inward so I can start thinking of something wishful or playful? And the moment you start doing this, you start encouraging your brain to become more creative. But if you're someone who says, okay, before I get to the strategic unfocus, how do I just focus better in a particular point in time? And this is something that we're doing on the ReuLay platform. ReuLay is a company that I co-founded. That's an app that allows people to make mindset shifts. And these mindset shifts are extremely important. What people don't realize about having ADHD, actually, if you're not attending to your focus overtly, either with medication or doing something overt, people with ADHD have twice the mortality rate before the age of 46. And part of that is that there's so much energy that's being utilized, and there are accidental injuries, there often is anxiety, there often is depression. All of this can contribute to that. So paying attention to your brain's ability to focus is pretty important. What I sometimes do with people is I'll say, why don't you just try 1 week with just one sort of browser up at a time? Because so many people have like 10 browsers open at the same time,
Yes.
and they're like, how do I go to this? What am I doing here? Oh my God, this is here. And I'm like, okay, have a one browser week, right? Just have a one browser week, see what that feels like. The second thing is, rather than randomly checking your social media or just checking just to take a break, tell yourself, I'm going to check my social media at this time and at that time. And by adding these constraints in your life, you actually understand what you're doing. But probably the most important thing is to think about what you value, right? Because if let's say what you value is your family, and what you value is giving your best to your family. And let's say that you can give part of giving your best is doing your best at work. Well, if you're going to do that, then don't just attach it to the work, attach it to the value. And if you're not working, then you can say, well, still, even if I'm not working, being focused, allowing, like setting up my meal prep, trying to figure out when I'm going to cook something, trying to figure out when I'm going to take time off, just being focused in that way can be super helpful. So I would say in summary that to contain your focus, setting up a single browser day is a great idea. I think also having specific times when you're not having this digital distraction is important. And then refueling your brain constantly will keep your brain more focused. Most people live their days with sort of, focus, 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 fatigue, and then they're out for the count. But, you wouldn't go cross country without refueling. So why would you go through your whole day without saying focus, unfocus to refuel, focus, unfocus? And that way you're keeping, metaphorically speaking, the maximum amount of gas in your brain so that you can go through your day with more energy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just knowing our audience and what they struggle with, like I think what you shared about unfocus and focus working together. I think I want everybody to buy your book because I can think of so many people I've worked with who they're beating themselves up because they're like, why can't I focus? And I think it would be so helpful for them to read that and learn from that because that's such a powerful way of looking at this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think also focus has this reputation. Like people are like, if you the person who's the most focused does the best. But if you listen to interviews of Jeff Bezos, for example, you'll hear him say, I have my difficult meeting times, like where I know I'm going to need a lot of my brain, and I'm not going to set that at 5 p.m. That's going to be at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., because that's when I have to use my brain the most. By 5 p.m., I'm like, that's too much. Like I need to do something more chill. So we always think that other people have some superhuman capacity, that they're being driven by something. But I think everybody knows that there are peaks and troughs to their day. And if you can know your own peaks and troughs, you'll be able to match what you have to do with those peak times.
That is so powerful. Just being honest with yourself about what those peak times are instead of what you think they should be. I personally found them to be a game changer. And I know some jobs they don't. You can't always engineer your day that way. I've been there, but when you can when you can do what you can to work around and really take the advantage of those times, it's such a different experience in a really positive way.
Yeah,
So thank you for
absolutely.
sharing that. I
Sure.
also wanted to ask you about fear. Now, this is something that I've seen this come up so much with my clients and my patients over the years. I certainly, in my business and at times in my personal life, have definitely seen how fear can really hold us back and, keep us stuck in stressful patterns as well. And in your book, Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear. For somebody and I'm like, where do we even start with talking about this book? But for somebody who is in this phase where they're recognizing that fear is having an effect on them, it's holding them back. Do you have any tips for, what might be a good place for them to start in terms of working on moving past it and starting to build healthier patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about this forever. So I used to run an anxiety disorder center at Harvard, and I also ran a part of the brain imaging center where we looked at brains that were in a state of fear. And all of my recommendations are generally based on what we know can actually change the brain. So one simple way to start is when you ask yourself, what is fear? What we're learning more and more is that fear is the brain's signal that your body has to change its metabolic parameters to prepare for a negative event. So, a long time ago, people would just say fear is some kind of emotion. It impacts the amygdala in the brain, which is like the brain's alarm center, and it sets that off. It does, but that part of your brain connects to the rest of your body. One of the main axes of fear in the brain is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And all that means is that your brain connects to parts of your body where cortisol is being made as part of your stress response. So it's important to remember that fear is a whole body situation. It's not just something that's in your brain. Now, if you ask yourself, how do you manage that fear? I think it depends on how that fear is manifesting. Is it manifesting as worry? Is it manifesting as slightly panicky feelings? What I see more and more in society is this low level of anxiety. Like people are like, I just got up. I did nothing. Why am I feeling like stressed? Like I'm feeling like some level of anxiety. And that's because there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the unconscious brain, right? And in the unconscious brain, what happens is that you're not even aware of what your brain's processing. But your brain's making up its mind about all kinds of things, a lot of which is not even true. So the first thing I like to tell people is to use the mnemonic CIRCA, CIRCA. And each of these defines a specific step that you can take to change your brain activation to lower your fear levels. So the first C in CIRCA is chunking. What chunking means is when you get up on a Monday morning and you're like, oh my God, I have so much to do today. And then the rest of the week, and how am I going to manage this? You think it's okay to just leave it in your brain like that. But your brain's freaking out. Even if you go about your day, your brain's like, oh my God, like, how am I going to get this done? If you just spend 1 minute and say, well, let me just chunk out, like, what do I need to do this morning? What do I need to do this afternoon? What do I need to do the rest of the week? Just doing that overtly calms the amygdala down because now you're not sending the message of I have 5 billion things to do and they need to happen now. So chunking is important, but it's not just breaking things down. It's also ruthlessly prioritizing. In my experience, nobody can get done what they think they should get done in a particular day. So if you say, I have to get this done, that's fine. And you say, this I'd like to get to, and this, it would be great, but if I don't get to it, it's not the end of the world. Just how using self talk in that way can be very calming to the brain. And then also, the other part of chunking is delegation, right? So delegating, we often forget that. It's like, wait a minute, do I have to do all of this? What if I got someone else to help me do this? So that C is the chunking part is about breaking things into pieces, into different chunks, ruthlessly prioritizing and delegating. The I in CIRCA is ignore mental chatter. And what that is mindfulness or cyclic sighing. So mindfulness is where you could basically sit back and close your eyes and pay attention to your breath. And you just pay attention to every inhale and exhale. And if your mind starts wandering, you bring it back to your breath, as if it's a flashlight. And people always say, "Well, that sounds ridiculous. Like, what does that do?" Well, when we look in the brain, it actually decreases overactivation in the amygdala. And some preliminary studies have shown that it can protect the ends of chromosomes so that you could potentially live longer. So that simple practice can be helpful. But recently, a study at Stanford showed that cyclic sighing is another way you can do this ignore mental chatter. And the way you do cyclic sighing is just for 5 minutes. You breathe into 3/4 and then another quarter, just a little bit, and then you slowly breathe out. So it's basically, and just that practice was shown to be even more effective than mindfulness in this one study. So ignore mental chatter is super important because the brain is just a noise making machine the whole day. It's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, what are you doing? Are you sure you do this? Do you know what you're going to do? What about that? What about the kids? What are you going to eat?" There's like a lot of stuff that's going on. So you want to bring that noise level down. The R is for reality check. And reality check is using self talk to say, this too shall pass. Sometimes you have these horrible things that happen. You're like, oh, I totally messed that up. And then it sticks with you. But if you can say, this too shall pass, it's like, it's over, next. Sometimes I tell people to drop it like it's hot. Just any negative thought is like, nope, I don't want to go finish. It's over. So that's what the R is like. The second C is control check, which is like the serenity prayer. Sometimes you turn on the TV and you're like, oh my God, it's a disaster everywhere in the world. It's like, well, what can you control? What can you not control? And why waste attentional space with things you can't control? So focus on the things you can control. Lady Gaga is a great example of this. She actually spoke to students at Yale about a point she reached in her career where she was in a state of burnout. And she was like, I didn't want to sing. And people were like, that's crazy. Like, you're so good at singing. Like, what would make you not want to sing? She said, well, I realized that I had to take selfies and I had more to offer the world than that. And I had to advertise perfumes and I don't even like perfumes. And I slowly realized that I could say no. And the more you learn to say no to things in your life, the more you can go home, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I can sleep with you any night because I respect you, because you're not just saying yes to stuff you don't want to say yes to. And then the last A is attention shift, which is shifting your attention from the problem to the solution. And the idea being that we get so stuck in the problem sometimes. We're like, oh my God, this is happening. And it's like, well, okay, we get it. Now let's shift attention to solution. So using CIRCA, which you can do on any Monday, you can do on just when you're feeling freaked out, or you can do every day of the week, is super helpful. And because I made ReuLay, I like to recommend to people. And right now we're actually doing a sort of an offer for free usage so people can try it out. And I'll tell you more of the details at the end of our interview. But ReuLay is also another way in which you can create this mindset shift to feel less stressed as well.
I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about it.
ReuLay is an app. It's at reulay.com, www.reulay.com. And what it is an app that allows you to make one of 9 mindset shifts. So you can go from distraction to focus. You can go from pessimism to optimism. You can go from uncertain to confident. You can go from bored to filled with awe. You can go from being disconnected with your body to being reconnected with your body. You can go from not feeling connected to anybody to feeling very connected to others. You can go from feeling dependent to feeling autonomous, feeling burnt out to feeling resilient, feeling disempowered to feeling empowered. But when you go to the app, you basically say, yeah, today I want to feel more confident. And so you hit confidence, and that takes you into one of several channels that you can look at, which will take just 2 to 5 minutes. There are some 10-minute experiences, but most people are like, I can't do more than 5 minutes a day. So if you do, you either go into a celebrity channel, or we've designed art based on the brain that is either nature or geometric or fractal, or breathing exercises, or embodiment exercises. And we're about to add some gaming and psychodynamic elements as well. But when you go into confidence, you go into celebrity journeys. You might see an interview in for confidence. It would be Zendaya. So talking about the fact that she just wasn't that confident. And at some point she was like, well, why don't I just use clothing as a way to express myself? And I can take on these different characters, and then I don't have to be obsessed with all the things that are wrong with the static me. And that sort of makes you think, oh, wow, that's kind of interesting. And that's based on the fact that with that relatedness, you have an increase in oxytocin, an increase in trust, and a decrease in fear. And you can basically tell the system, because it's AI driven, you can say, I like that experience, show me another one just like that. Or you can say, don't show it to me. And as you use the system more and more, you can actually learn to feel better, and the system will respond to you, and you can track your progress over time. And if anybody's interested in this, they can contact us at solutions@ReuLay.com. So solutions at REULAY.com. And we'd be happy to give them a 3-month free subscription so that they can try it out and see what it feels like.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. It sounds really exciting and much needed. I think having these tools that can shift our mindset in a way that's approachable is so important. I see people struggle with this all day, every day. So I think that's so valuable. I one question I also wanted to ask you, just because, I'm a dietitian and, by training and a health coach. And so food plays a big part. And I know something that you've shared is that decisions about nutrition, can sometimes require like complex thinking. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, what I think a lot of people don't recognize is that a lot of the information we hear is information that is well marketed. It's not necessarily a good summary of what's in the literature. So, for any study that you tell me in medicine, I can probably show you a counter study. For example, there have been studies a long time ago, people would say, maybe you could drink 2 glasses of alcohol a night if you were male, one if you were female. Then it graduated into 0 glasses of alcohol, because if you drink any alcohol, it's bad for you. And then just this last month, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, they found that if you just suddenly abruptly stop drinking alcohol, you can increase your bad cholesterol and decrease your good cholesterol. So what that tells us is that the decision should be yours. You should decide what's working for you and what's not working for you. It needs to be personalized. And rather than just taking one bit of information, I always recommend to people, ask your doctor, is there anything that shows the opposite of that? And there's another thing. If you look at antioxidants, for example, people will be like, you got to eat your broccoli. It's a lot of antioxidants. It's really great, good for you. It is good for you to have antioxidants. But studies also show that antioxidants may accelerate malignant progression. So you want to be careful about what works for you. And I honestly think we're living in an age where it's never been more important to take in information from science, but to actually intuitively make decisions about your own body and teach yourself how to make decisions about your own body. So what I mean, and it's the same thing with the study I quoted on ghrelin, right? So if your mind can change a hormone and make you feel fuller. Or there was another study done in hotel workers where they told one group of them that their work was actually very good exercise, same work that they did as the other group. They didn't change anything they did, because they believed that it was really good exercise. They lost weight, they lost body fat. So that's because belief is not like some abstract nothing thing. It increases dopamine, it relaxes you. So if you have decreased cortisol, you're probably not going to have as much fat buildup. So I think with diet, I always say to people that you'll hear the fad of the month always. If you just go to Instagram or you go on it, you'll hear all kinds of fads, and you'll buy into what you want to buy into. But what you believe matters a lot. So it's important for you to believe that. And then also it's important for you to, I think, take a strategic approach to your own goals rather than just believing everything that's out there. Say to yourself, well, what's the advantages and the disadvantages? Look up opposite studies so that you can actually embrace this complexity. And actually, the unfocused circuit in the brain is the circuit that allows you to integrate subtle information. So if you are trying to figure out, oh my God, there's so much information out there, how do I put this together? You're not going to get to understand this more by focusing more. By strategically putting in these unfocused times into your day, your brain can put this together so you can have those eureka moments that you need. So that's what I mean by complexity, that there's no one size fits all.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think, to your point, I think this is a time where it's so important. And I think we can just do ourselves a huge service by learning how to tune into the body. I've gotten pushback on this, like in work settings about like, why are you spending time on this? Just tell people what to eat, give them a meal plan. I'm like, yes, but that's not the whole picture. That's not helping them if I just do that. And I love what you shared about taking a strategic approach to your own goals. I think that is such an important message for people to take away, that it's not about what goals you think you should be going after. It's not about someone else's strategy. It's like a personalized strategy for your unique goals. I love that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often say to people, it's interesting in the coaching literature, Richard Boyatzis has looked at like what truly helps when you're coaching someone. And what he found was that coaching for goals is less effective than compassion oriented coaching. And that's because if you're just goal, 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 it activates the fight or flight system. And then your brain's just in a state of panic over what to do next. And then the next thing you know, you're having 10 times the amount of some dessert that you didn't mean to have because you've been trying to restrict yourself before that. So, what you want to do is remember that compassion matters, compassion towards others, but also toward yourself. And I think if you recognize that and you have goals, you're more likely to be able to have a calmer transition to reaching what you want.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, I just have a couple more questions for you. I want to be mindful of your time, but I did want to ask you about balancing creativity with scientific endeavors. I don't know if you know this. I, in a past life, received a BFA in writing from Emerson College up in Boston, where you have roots as well. But then I found my way into the sciences, and I'm so grateful I get to use both parts of my brain, but I certainly struggle with making time for creative writing and playing music and doing art. I think just juggling so many things, right? And I understand that you recently completed writing a musical, you designed a fashion show. Like, I would love to hear if you have any tips that you would share with someone for balancing creative projects with more like scientific, professional endeavors.
Yeah, firstly, I think balance is almost impossible. And I think it's almost especially impossible for women. Indra Nooyi, who was the CEO of Pepsi, was asked, she said, but can women have it all? And she said, actually, we can't. Like, we actually cannot. And once you rest with that, you realize, wait a minute, you're right. Like, I can't be the CEO of a company and be the best mother possible because they're having mother meetings at 9 a.m. when I'm on a flight to China. And so, how do I do this? And she said what she did was she would just say, I just felt so guilty because I'd come home every day and my children would be like, you were not at the meeting this morning. So, what I did was I called the school and I said, which other parents were not at the meeting? And so they told me. And so when my kids would come home, I would be like, well, I wasn't the only one not there. Mrs. Rag wasn't there. This person wasn't there. She said, because she said in her words, she said, you die with guilt. But she also said, when her kids needed to play Nintendo, she had an administrative assistant who agreed to essentially screen the call. So she had a list of, have you done your homework? Have you eaten your food? Have you done this? And at the end, she would say, yeah, you can go ahead and play Nintendo for 30 minutes. And she said, if you don't set up systems like that in your life, it's kind of impossible. And what she also said was, her husband always critiqued her and said, it's always like, your work, your work, your work. And then, your children, I come last. And she said there are two ways of looking at that. One is like, yes, often your spouse does, take the hit. The other is you should be glad you're on the list. And so when she was just had a good humor about the fact that balance is very difficult. That said, for me, creativity is the fuel for so much of what I do. Music is something that I love. Digital art is something that I love. I love thinking about fashion. I'm actually researching the science of fashion to be able to put some of those interventions on the ReuLay platform. I feel like it's less about balance and more about knowing what your priorities are in terms of what you have to finish, but also knowing that your soul needs food, whether it's music or like we are born to have artistic expressions. It's not just artists who want to be artistic. You look at any scientific formula, it's pretty artistic. Math shares so much with music. So I think within every person, there's now a lot of evidence in the field of neuroaesthetics to show that artistic expression is good for the brain and it's good for the body. and it helps you age more successfully. So I would say that if you're someone who says, I just don't have time to do that, set aside 1 hour a week. Just start with that on any day where you think you can afford that. And whether it's scribbling or coloring in or drawing something or making something, or whether it's even like a few minutes in the shower, the reason people get their best ideas in the shower is because this unfocused network is turned on and it's putting two and two together and connecting all these ideas. And I think part of what I feel like I hear in your story of going from writing to science to diet is a willingness to surrender to a calling, right? So rather than balancing something, when sometimes, like, there are times in my life when I'm just like, how did I end up here? Like,
Yes.
what, like, how did I actually make a, like, even with coaching, I don't think I made a conscious decision. It moved me, and I was in Boston for most of my life, but my heart was always in New York, and so I was sort of like, at some point, I was like, wait a minute, like, what's happening? Why am I not? I'm coming to New York every 2 weeks. I should just maybe come here. And so, I think it's not just what we decide; it's also what drives us and inspires us. And as human beings, we owe it to ourselves to honor that which inspires us. And so, I would say, rather than striving for balance, I would say the thing that people do the least that they should be doing is listening to themselves, to their own minds and their own bodies. They listen to everyone else, everyone on the internet, every expert in the world. But as an expert in my field, the thing I would most want to tell you is that you are the best expert of your own life. And so you can listen to all the information you want, but in the end, your body and your mind is telling you what it wants. So listen to it and allow it to have some of this joy from time to time.
I love that so much. And I tell my patients and my clients all the time, you are the expert on you. I need to take my own advice.
Right. Right.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. And I so appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me today. The last questions I just want to ask you first off, if people want to connect with you, buy your books, learn more about your work and the app, what's the best way for them to do that?
So to connect with me, my website is drsrinipillay.com, DRSRINIPILLAY.com. My corporate website is nbgcorporate.com. So N as in Nancy, B as in boy, G as in girl, corporate.com. You can also connect with me on Instagram. I've been having a lot of fun on Instagram, putting out science-based articles. It's Dr. Srini Pillay, or you can connect with me at Dr. Srini Pillay on LinkedIn. And my book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, is on Amazon, as is Life Unlocked, and a few other books I've written as well. And I would love for you to participate in what I'm talking about because, frankly, I'm not just talking to myself. I'm talking to the world, and to be in conversation is a privilege. So I would really love it if people hopped on and expressed what they felt, whether they agreed or didn't. I think we live in a world where even respectful disagreement can help both people grow.
Absolutely. Last question for you. I ask this of all my guests, just because I love there's so many different ways of interpreting this, and I know it can be constantly evolving. But today, at this moment in time, Srini, what does healthy living mean to you?
I think healthy living, to a large extent, is about having an ideal self and honoring the ideal self. And if you know the difference between yourself as you are now and what, not your ought self, not what other people think you ought to be, but what you think is your ideal self, healthy living is movement toward that ideal self in whatever way you want to move. So whether it's health, whether it's wealth, whether it's happiness, if you have an ideal self, and this has been proven by extensive research, again by Richard Boyatzis, guiding yourself and navigating through life with a clear picture of who you are and who your ideal self is can go a long way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I am really excited to share this episode with my audience. So thank you for making time today.
Thanks so much, Jess. I really appreciate it. It's always really lovely being in conversation, and I hope our paths will cross again in the future.
Absolutely. Me too. And for all of you guys who are listening, thank you as always for being here. I appreciate your time and energy. We couldn't do this podcast without you. So if you like what you hear, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. They do matter and help me continue to bring you wonderful, insightful guests. So as always, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to Drama Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. We'll see you next time.
And just one more thing. I may be a dietitian, but I'm not your dietitian. The information in this podcast is meant for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. It is also not a replacement for individual counseling. Always check with your healthcare provider for questions related to your own health and well-being.